I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways to contact us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us, thestory@kgw.com, or call our phone number, 503-226-5090, and leave a message. We're coming to you from Vancouver because they're about to open their second tiny village for homeless people. This is called Hope Village. It's the culmination of 9 years of work, a unified city council, a partnership with a local church. And it has lots of lessons for Portland and anyone else, any community, trying to house the homeless. Vancouver's newest tiny home village is located on city-owned property at 4915 East 4th Plain. Vancouver has dedicated $1 million to keep the place running for up to 7 years. It will hold up to 40 people and their pets if they have them. Mayor Ann McInerney-Ogle showed me around.
This could be for two because this is a nice comfy bed, 4 windows, a door with a lock, but this is the unique thing. This is a fan for heating and cooling with all the electricity and everything else. Fire extinguisher, fire marshal very much wanted all of that taken care of. Smoke alarm in the ceiling. So it's passed all of the fire marshal requirements in here. Vancouver has an estimated 500 to 600 people living outside. The mayor said years ago there were few, if any. Homelessness started in Portland and everyone commented on it, and we didn't have that problem. And then people started thinking, oh, there's a tent. Oh, there's another tent. What's going on? She said 9 years ago, city councilors started getting educated on the issue, and many took volunteer shifts at emergency shelters. We've had councilors take care of food and clothing and clean up at shelters. You know, we'll don our gloves, tie our hair up, and go out and clean. And so it meant a unified council to figure out what's going on here in our community. Let's actually get our hands dirty and figure out what this is all about, and then how can we figure out how to solve the problem. She also went out with an advocate to see the camping issue for herself. She took me on a midnight run to check on the homeless in downtown Vancouver. I didn't know that they were in tents behind this door, under that tree, under this porch. Having a unified city council was a key lesson learned here, and the mayor said it made later decisions much easier. They first tried a navigation center with numerous homeless services, but neighbors hated it, and eventually the center closed. Then in December of 2021, Vancouver opened its first Safe Stay Village on the east side of the city. And now, just 4 months later, it's opening Hope Village, closer to the middle of town. Homeless leaders with the city helped educate nonprofits, and now 2 separate groups will manage the villages day to day. Jamie and Tyler worked with a couple nonprofits to help them understand and to mentor them so that they could take on the responsibility. But they're only responsible for 20 to 40 people. Portland, oh my goodness, I know you're looking at some big camp opportunities. We don't have the nonprofit people who could do that. That's another lesson. Start small and work with nonprofits to run the camps 24 hours a day. Brian Norris is an associate pastor with Living Hope Church. It will be responsible for this newest village.
But we just didn't have a place where throughout the year people knocked on our door to put them in that day. So this definitely attracted us in that way, that now we have a place where we can get people in, transition them into a different way of life.
He said residents cannot use drugs or alcohol on the property, but they don't have to be clean to move in here. Charles Stewart will be one of the on-site managers. He will live here as well.
I've been homeless off and on for a little over 20 years. I will say mainly due to drug addiction. I've got about 2.5 years sober, clean and sober now.
Congratulations.
I found Living Hope Church. That's been really big, a big part of my life.
He pointed out a big tent where residents will eat, meals will be delivered most days, and another where they will meet with counselors and others. Porta potties will serve as bathrooms. The shelters have electricity, but no running water.
And I'm really excited about this and seeing people get up out of tents and off the street where it's, there's a lot of feeling of a big feeling of hopelessness when you're in a tent or under a tarp or under a bridge.
The mayor is excited too about this village and the next one, which she hopes to open by summer.
It is a wonderful feeling to help someone step up, step out of what they were living in, to take care and remove that from their life and help them see a future.
And it's a program, definitely a program that seems to work. And we're going to move our Hey Help campaign up to the top here because it's all connected. We're asking you to donate to Outsiders In this week. I mentioned the separate nonprofits run each of Vancouver's tiny shelter villages. Well, this is the group that runs the first village that opened last December. If you want to donate, just hold up your phone's camera right now to that QR code on your screen, or you could also go to kgw.com/help. Vancouver is not the only place opening new tiny shelter villages. Salem is doing something similar. Our reporter Blair Best was at a city-owned site where they were putting the finishing touches on the shelters.
I have the stability of being more permanent.
Kay Carey moved into this shelter community last April. She'd been living in a tent for 6 years.
We're not looking over our shoulder because the cops are going to come in and tell us to move.
She's able to stay with her dogs and family, something other shelters don't allow.
That was one major thing, and me and my husband can be together. Other shelters would separate us.
But it's more than just a place to call home. There are case managers on site to help with medical care, job, and apartment searches.
So they're getting connected to all the resources just on one site without even having to leave.
Josh Erickson runs Church at the Park. He says 400 people are on a wait list for one of these shelters, and they're focusing on bringing in more women.
Salem has a large population of unsheltered women, and so how do we, support the most vulnerable in our community?
We can take them from being homeless and get them out of the transitional housing into a job or an apartment. That's huge.
Sonia Wheeler runs Idomo, the company building the shelters.
To see the beds in them and the sheets on the beds and the coverings on the windows, it's really neat.
This is the first step out of a tent a lot of times and into an actual roof over your head.
Salem City Councilor Chris Hoy says the number of chronically homeless people in the area, meaning those who have been without housing for 3 or more years, is double the national average. He believes micro-shelters play a critical role in their response to this crisis.
It's not just a Salem issue, it's not an Oregon issue, it's a nationwide issue.
A sense of security, it's still stressful. It really is, because I really want into my own place. It's been too long.
Those at Church at the Park plan to fill the new shelters tomorrow. And Blair, I think a lot of people wonder, do these systems really work? Do people move out of these into more stable housing?
Well, Pat, these shelters are a form of transitional housing. In just the past year, more than 50% of the people living in these shelters have since found their own apartment. So clearly it's a method that's working. Now, the director of the program says it's really the stability that these shelters give people that makes all the difference.
And so by having actually a place where I know I can lock my door and I can leave, I can go get a job. I can go meet with case managers. I can get connected to resources. But if I think I'm going to lose everything the moment I leave my tent, they're not going to be able to make it anywhere.
Now, again, tomorrow, 40 people, making it a total of 80, will be moving out of their tents and into these shelters. And from there, with the help of local nonprofits, they'll be building the resources that they need in order to find more permanent housing. Pat?
All right, thank you, Blair. And by the way, we want to welcome you to KGW as our newest reporter. Blair comes from the other Portland, Maine, where she's been killing it out there. Blair will be covering the homeless issues here in our region. Welcome, Blair. First question, are you registered to vote? Because today's the last day to do so before the Oregon primary. Second question, are you registered with a political party? Because it's also the last day to do that if you want to have a say in some of the biggest state races. And that's because of Oregon's closed primary system. We'll explain when the story. Welcome back, and keep sending your questions and comments to our email address, thestory@kgw.com. Or give us a call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We really do want to interact with you. We care what you say, and we want to hear your comments. If you're an Oregonian, today is the last day to make sure that you're registered to vote if you want to be able to participate in the May 17th primary. If you're not registered, we have a link on kgw.com. It will take you to the Oregon Secretary of State's website where you can easily register there. You will need an Oregon driver's license, permit, or ID card, but what if you're not sure if you're registered to vote? Well, you can check your voter status on the state's My Vote website. It's really that simple. Just put My Vote in a search engine, then enter your name and date of birth at the site. But remember this, it's a little bit picky. I checked mine this afternoon, and when I entered Pat for my first name, it reported that I'm not registered, which is wrong. So then I changed it to Patrick, and sure enough, it found me just fine. So keep that in mind. You may need to enter your full legal name. We also have a link to that on kgw.com. That is also where you can check to see if you are registered with a political party. Now, that's something you do not have to do, and a lot of you have told me that you are super proud of being non-affiliated, declaring no political party has your allegiance, which is fine. But Oregon has closed primaries, meaning only registered Democrats can vote in the Democratic primary, only registered Republicans can vote in the Republican primary. So, if you want to vote for candidates in the governor's race or congressional races or state legislative races, you do have to pick a party by today. Otherwise, your ballot will only have nonpartisan races like judges and local measures, and this is for the primary that we're talking about. Anna sent us this email saying, browsing through the voters' pamphlet for the Oregon primary election today, my spouse and I were discussing why Oregon still has closed primaries. I once heard that approximately 1 out of every 3 registered voters in Oregon are affiliated with a party other than the Democrats or Republicans, or not affiliated with the party at all. That law seems pointless to me. Today there are, I believe, only 9 states that have closed primaries. So why are Oregon's primaries still closed? Seems like having closed primaries is kind of forcing people eager to participate in the right to vote to choose affiliation with one of the 2 main political parties. Well, that is a great question, Anna. Different states have different ways that their primaries work, and you are right. Oregon is one of only 9 states where primaries are completely closed. We're showing you the red states there on the map. That's where it's closed. That means you have to become a member of the political party to vote in one with no exceptions. So, what's the thinking behind this? Well, there's arguments for and against closed primaries. Some say they prevent crossover voting. For example, if a Democrat thought Bud Pierce, who's a Republican, was a weaker Republican than Christine Drazan, they would vote for Pierce, hoping he would win in the primary and then lose to the Democrat in the general election. Now, I just made that up. I'm not saying Pierce is weaker at all, and I'm not saying Democrats would do that at all, but that is the strategy behind the crossover vote. The flip side of this is with the closed primary, some argue that candidates are forced to take more extreme positions because only the hardcore voters turn out in a primary, and they are often more extreme than the general population. So candidates have to appeal to them to win, and that keeps more moderate candidates from advancing to the general election. Right now, a group called Oregon Open Primaries is trying to get an initiative on the November ballot. It would amend the state constitution to allow open primaries for statewide and federal offices. They're still collecting signatures, and they need almost 150,000 to make it onto the ballot. We should mention that voters have rejected similar ballot measures in 2014 and 2008. So here's my opinion on that. First, let's remember that at a time some states seem to be working to make it harder to vote, Oregon has always been a leader in making it easy. We were the first in the nation to make vote by mail the standard, and that was 24 years ago. And then 6 years ago, we were the first in the nation again, this time with the motor voter registration. That signs you up to vote when you renew your driver's license. Against that backdrop, I think this is absolutely ridiculous that we still have closed primaries. Come on. I checked 90 minutes ago. There are 1,027,139 unaffiliated voters in Oregon. That's more than the number of registered Republicans. It's more than the number of registered Democrats. But the current rules will keep those million people from voting in the primary for either the Democrat or Republican candidates for governor, Congress, or state legislative races. That's just wrong. And I know the argument about crossover voting, but I doubt enough people would actually do that to make a difference. One of the common arguments against closed primaries is that it makes the candidates more loyal to the party than to the voters. That does sound accurate to me. Oregon state law allows Democrats and Republicans to close their primaries. And I just looked up that Oregon Open Primary Initiative. It's It's pretty simple. It would just change the state constitution to require all publicly funded elections for state and federal office be open to all qualified candidates and to all registered voters, regardless of party affiliation. I gotta say, that sounds like a better system than what we have now. If we really want leaders who represent the people, we should let as many of the people as possible vote for those leaders. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Let me know. Send me an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call our phone number, leave a message, 503-226-5090. I also want to talk for a moment about Betsy Johnson. If you have your voter's guide, you'll notice that she's not there under the list of governor candidates. That's because she's running unaffiliated from any political party, and that means she cannot be part of the primary election. She will be running in the general election, and since she has a ton of money, it means we're going to have a real three-way race in November. We want to wrap up our coverage of our first debate between the Democratic frontrunners for governor tonight. If you missed it before, we hosted a debate last week with Portland City Club between former House Speaker Tina Kotek and State Representative Tobias Reed. He's the state treasurer. You can watch the whole thing right now on our KGW YouTube channel, but tonight we want to focus on the candidates' plans for the pandemic. Oregon had some of the strictest COVID precautions in the country, and while we had some of the lowest numbers of deaths, mask mandates and school closures and restaurant closures, that also enraged a lot of people, and it led to some really deep divisions throughout the state. So we asked the candidates, how will you fix that mess while the pandemic is still going on?
Well, I will say I think the divide was there before the pandemic, or at least the perceived divide from folks who live in all parts of the state. We were successful as a state early in the pandemic in keeping people alive. Some tough choices were made about asking people to stay home, wear masks, be careful. And because of that, we did so much better than other states to keep people alive. There are a lot of people walking around today because we did those things.
Kotek said she thinks the governor should be as clear as possible about what the science is saying and how people should respond to it. So we asked, okay, if the science says we need to bring back restrictions like the mask mandate, would you pull the trigger?
Is there a point, Tina, where you would ever reinstate a mask mandate?
As governor, I'm going to follow the science. I want to know what the experts say. I hope we don't have another surge where we have to go back to any kind of enhanced public health protocols. And as governor, one of your main priorities is to keep people safe and alive. I hope we don't have to go there, but I will follow the science to make sure we do what we can to keep people safe and healthy.
You know, that doesn't really answer the question, does it? Let's ask again.
So if the science points that way, you would reinstate a mask mandate?
I think if requirement of having to wear masks, for example, on airplanes, if it shows that we're seeing a surge around the country, I personally would support having us back wearing masks in an airplane. So I think it's—
What about in Oregon, though, in general, the mask mandate that we saw before?
Well, I think it depends on what the science is saying. And if it looks like the numbers are increasing and our hospital systems are failing, then yes, we need to be back to wearing masks until that crisis passes.
Tobias Reed, on the other hand, well, he had some more time to think about the answer than Tina Kotek. While she danced around it, he got to the point a little bit more quickly.
Governor Brown deserves a lot of credit for making some tough decisions early on and putting us in a better position, as you said. But I definitely felt some frustration around the inconsistency of communication. And as a parent of public school students, I was extraordinarily frustrated when we saw bars and restaurants open before we saw schools open. So I think being really clear about our priorities and consistent in our communications will help us when we need to make those sacrifices. I think it would be irresponsible to say that there is no scenario in which masks or other mandates might be necessary, but it's certainly not my preference.
Again, you can watch the entire debate on our KGW YouTube channel. There's a lot we've not been able to get to, like how the candidates would handle climate change and what their favorite show was to binge during the pandemic. We also have full one-on-one interviews with the candidates. And by the way, we're going to feature the top Republicans on a debate next week, so send us your questions for them. Still ahead, a look back at the history of the White Shield Center in Portland, long a safe haven for single mothers who had nowhere else to go. That's when the story continues. A recently sold piece of Portland property has a little-known history as a haven for single moms. In a recent ceremony, the land and its buildings were turned over to new owners. It was sold by the Salvation Army, who owned it for more than 100 years. During that time, hundreds of women gave birth there. Blair Best explains.
At the end of the day, this is a safe place for young girls who are in need of help.
Sean Higley was born on the property in 1963, which is nestled in the West Hills off Alexandra Avenue. His mother was 17 years old at the time.
She didn't know what to do, so she took a Greyhound bus to Portland, a taxi to White Shield, and she stayed here for weeks.
White Shield was the name of the property, a respite for many women, like Higley's mother, who had nowhere else to go.
Young, they want to maybe be a mom, but they're not equipped to be a mom.
Higley, like many others born with the help of White Shield, was put up for adoption. For years, he searched for his birth mother. One day, he finally found her.
It was interesting. It was kind of an out-of-body experience, but I got to say thank you and learned all about my birth father, who I've never met.
There was a lot of stigma against women who were pregnant out of wedlock, who had children without a father present.
Major Bob Lloyd is with the Salvation Army. He knows for many women, this was the last place they saw their children.
This is actually the room where women would say goodbye to their babies from about 1950 on. Then the baby was just taken out this door right into the parking lot and was taken away for adoption.
There's so many miracles that happen on this property.
Cynthia Miguel worked at White Shield, giving 24/7 care to pregnant teens and women recovering from trauma.
It was powerful, it was exhausting and hard, and I got cursed out a lot, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful work.
That work ended just 2 years ago when the program closed because of financial issues.
It was profoundly sad and tragic and heartbreaking.
The Salvation Army then sold it to the Japan Institute. Some of the proceeds now going toward local shelters for women and children.
It was profoundly painful. The girls were devastated, but it made a really painful situation. The fact that the Japan Institute is going to be here makes it totally better.
Rooms like this one used to be where many pregnant women would stay when they were receiving medical care. Soon these rooms will be part of a residence hall for many students and guests.
We see as we are now the next stewards of this building. We're going to have this just amazing creative energy on this level of the building.
Will Lerner works for the Japanese Garden, which will run the Institute. He walked us through the property, focusing on the future of these historic buildings.
That will lead us into our fine arts studio, as well as other artist spaces.
The addition to the gardens will offer more educational opportunities for artists in the area.
There's just so many stories here, so many lives have been impacted, that it feels a little sad to give it away. But I also know that the Portland Japanese Garden will have some incredible future stories.
Those here at the Japan Institute hope to complete renovations and open the campus by the end of 2024. In Portland, Blair Best, KGW News.
We asked for your comments, so I thought we'd take a couple ganders at the ones that came in during the show. Rob from Milwaukee says, Pat, I think your position on open primaries is misguided. It's the Democratic and Republican primary. Did you get to vote for Grand Poobah at the Moose Lodge when you're not a member? No, Rob, but they have no impact on my life either. Our elected representatives certainly do. So I'm not going with you on that one. Rob, I do appreciate you writing in, though. That's very nice of you. And Joanne says, Pat, you are not wrong. You know what? We might as well leave it while I'm ahead. Thanks for watching. That's the story. Remember, though, our story never ends. I'll see you tomorrow night.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
And we begin with a stark